Throughout RPG horrors, there have been a lot of wonderful memories created because of a game's fantastic storyline, or just simply by the humorous nature that some characters can present towards the player. But in this video, we're going to be looking at the opposite spectrum of this genre of gaming, the perspectives which I think are truly horrifying. And horrifying not to the extent that it is scary, but horrifying to the extent that it is quite unbearable to bear with. So let's just go through some of these categories which I think are pretty touchy, and you can get good spectrums of it and bad spectrums of it. So let's get cracking. Game titles are a very small bit of a game, but when you just look at it from the external perspective, they're actually more important than you realise. That and the image and the description itself. So just look at some of these on board and just take on board what you can see. Not all of these are RPG horrors, some of these are just RPG makers and others from other engines which you can see on the rpgmaker.net website. But as you can see, some of these are quite straight to the point, quite short, clearly written out, and others are just, well, random, could say. Short description, sorry, an image that really doesn't make any sense. But I'll leave it up to you to decide which ones are good and which ones are not. I'm not going to put the developers' names in there just in case I get some flack for it. But then again, you can research that for yourself if you think I should. But anyways, the game title in itself is really important towards how a game is perceived from an external perspective, without actually even going into the game itself. If we try to say to someone, I would like for you to play Two-Button Crew Smash Bros. Getting Old, for example. Number one, what the heck is the game going on about? Number two, is this a spin-off from Super Smash Bros.? And number three, what's the purpose of the game in itself? I mean, even the thumbnail of the picture itself doesn't look particularly striking from an external perspective, so to say. But you're going to have to go through the idea that maybe this is just for fun, maybe this is not serious, but in all matters perspective, I think when you think of RPG Maker games, it's going to be more the point where it has a bit into it, something that makes it striking, makes it unique in its own little way, but having this just seems like a spin-off and not something unique in itself. You can also call this the game's menu. There are title screens which literally have nothing on it, some which I feel give away what's going to happen within the game, others with a ridiculously loud soundtrack to it, and finally other title screens which have stretched images, effects that don't make sense, random images which have been chewed up and spat out, and there you go, you have a title screen. To me, a title screen, or a menu as it probably would be called, should be something which presents a player with something visually creative, something effective, something that will make the player want to play the game from just its visual appeals alone. If an introduction doesn't present the player to the game, then that player is most likely going to click off the game immediately. Also, you don't want the introduction of a game to linger out so long that your roast chicken is cooked and ready to eat from the oven. An introduction, I feel, should be anywhere from no introduction to around about 5 minutes at max. Anything more and I feel that you're not giving the player the opportunity to actually play the game but observe it like you would in a visual novel. It has to present to the player with a little bit of story so that they can get a little bit of an idea of what's going on, but at the same time don't actually just full blow the story so that there's no more mystery to question yourself with. While there are games like Dreaming Mary, False Outcry, Eve, and Angels of Death which presents great introductions to the player, you will encounter introductions in games which don't necessarily really click to you, which is unfortunate. The most important aspect of any RPG Maker game. In any genre regardless, I feel that characters have to be visually different, they have to have different likes, different dislikes, and just an air about them which makes them feel different when you look at them firsthand. Particularly with horror games / dark games, the characters in the games have to have some sense of emotion, some sense of sadness, depending on the story of the game itself. Text alone does not portray a character's sadness. There's also got to be the character sprite and bonus points, sound clips. Without emotions within a horror/dark game and without visual aesthetic differences and personality differences, then I feel that all the main characters within a game are pretty much similar. Misao, for example, has a lot of main characters within the game. Aside Mr. Soda, I feel personally that the characters in Misao have really similar personalities. They mostly speak similar, and every time I see the character again, it feels like I'm speaking to the same character that I am, but just with different visual aesthetics. Plan out the characters in your game. Make sure that they are all in some ways different. Otherwise you'll fall into the trap that people can't really tell the difference between characters aside, like I said earlier, their visual aesthetics. Impacting with the tippy top of a tree, hitting the rooftop of a house, walking over what is necessarily an impassable path, or just outright walking outside of a map are just a few examples of a lack of effective scripting. While your game is literally 100% fictional, unless you include figures in there which are from the real world, you need to keep a sense that you need your players to actually get a grip of realism when playing your game. You don't want things to be abnormal. There are a lot of full games out there which have been carefully looked over before they've been published, and even some demos have been really good as well when it comes to this matter. They act how they should in real life, which is very good in order to portray realism. But when you look around a few games, you will know that there are a few errors within which you instantly spot, which is very unreal and impossible to achieve in real life. Unless there are ghosts who can actually phase through walls or other paranormal/extraterrestrial entities, then keep it to being real in the most part. Possibly a cousin to characters is the story of the game. You don't want a story of the game to be so bland that you're physically looking at a piece of paper, or the factor that you don't want the story of the game to be so repetitive that you're looking at the same piece of the game in every single minute that you are playing it. For the most part, I believe stories should have a mixed bag of different elements, surprising elements, elements that most players can understand or at times keep it a mystery if it is appropriate for the scenario. But most importantly, I feel the story needs to keep the player playing the game rather than clicking off and finding something else. If a story is not keeping the player to the game, then they are going to click the X button faster than a person realizes that they are touching something hot or sharp. Prom Dreams and Angels of Death are two games I feel present a very effective and at all times a very different story, but there are games in this genre which you will see that will not provide a satisfaction which actually gives you a story. A definite cousin to scripting, which is mapping. And this will be one of the sections in this video which I'm actually going to describe specifically about certain games. Forest of Animals and Mystery Dorm. When you walk around Forest of Animals, it's actually much smaller than it is. Unless someone's chopped all these trees down and laid them landscape so that they're actually all on the floor, then why can't I walk underneath this tree? Like, what is it with all these trees? Have they got some sort of divine power which prevents me from actually walking underneath them? Are these trees actually physically on the floor so that I can't actually go through them? An explanation please, game. And Mystery Dorm, would you look at the beds in this game? What interior designer would design this place thinking, I'm going to have half the beds facing in the room and half the beds actually facing the wall? Are the beds that are facing inwards towards the room the good children and the bad ones are the naughty children? An explanation please, game. Like scripting, it's got to be realistic and to the point which the player can understand. Something which frustrates some players, but to me personally, spelling and grammar is something which is incredibly minor to pass by when it comes to spelling and grammar errors. Why it doesn't infuriate me is mainly because not all developers that type in English are actually native English speakers. So when it comes down to spelling and grammar errors, I'm actually more infuriated by the reactions of people who are angry about spelling and grammar errors than myself actually encountering spelling and grammar errors and pointing it out nicely and professionally rather than just outright blowing a trumpet. Unlike drawing something or composing something or actually voice acting something, spelling and grammar is incredibly easy to rectify. So not really much to say about spelling and grammar because it is obvious in itself. Something which infuriates me a lot within RPG horror games are the riddles and puzzles which can sometimes lay around the games. With puzzles, yes, you need to lay the player a challenge rather than something which is too easy, but not stupidly challenging to the point where the player is so infuriated that they can't process through the game that they instantly click the close button because of the damn right difficulty of the puzzle itself. Even when developers say that they've had beta testers test the puzzles themselves and they say they are quote unquote not difficult, you as the developer always need to say to yourself, well, I've written this game, I know exactly what it is inside out, but if I say that it is easy, does that mean that for the other 7 billion inhabitants on this planet that it's going to be easy for them too? I doubt it. You need to give the players some help when it comes to puzzles, something that they can actually see and use when it comes to solving it, whether if it's a code or a riddle or anything that involves something which advances in the game and actually allows you to go through the game once you've solved the puzzle or the riddle in itself. If it's a math problem, then I know that most people are going to despise puzzles like that, although for me personally I find math problems quite simple. And that's only because me personally, I can understand math problems quite easily and able to rectify them. Not something which is written in scribbles and blurs and then that's the only clue which the players have got. Also known as hints which are not actually hints but just text. Over the story of the game or the characters in the game or the visual aesthetics in the game, nothing makes me close a game more than a game which has a puzzle or a riddle which is impossible, and I mean the word impossible, to solve. False Elf Time, the game that you're seeing right now, definitely up there as one of the most difficult games to complete and one of the most difficult games to understand the story within. The sole reason why I kept playing False Elf Time to completion is because every time a new bit of story opens up, it always opens up a new can of mysteries, which inspires me to keep playing the game. It's like that very odd good shot of golf that you play. It keeps wanting you to play the game despite the other 95% of the shots that you play in golf being absolute dog shit. Randomness. An element within the game which has no set value and nothing in which you can be certain about. If there are any games within RPG horror which has elements of randomness in the game which has no set values, especially when it comes to survival items, then there is no other game which can replace it on the top podium position than Candle. Candle is a game which is incredibly despisable if you are infuriated by factors of randomness like collecting ink, collecting candles, and knowing how much longer you've got with the candles until they are completely burnt out and you meet an unfortunate demise. But the thing within Candle which is absolutely infuriating is whether or not you're going to actually get a candle or an ink, or in fact nothing from the appropriate places in which they spawn. Actually, if you watch my Let's Play of Candle, particularly the third and fourth videos within the Let's Play in itself, you can see the sheer annoyment that I have when playing the game. I just really wanted to complete it so that I can get it done and over with. Next category, please. Features within a game which gives you an unnerving factor, something which keeps you on edge, something which is very unexpected and makes you very scared. RPG Maker as an engine actually has its limits and doesn't really make any particular game incredibly scary, but there are some games out there which actually gives you a sensation that you are on your seat, on the edge of your seat, and quite actually not knowing what's going to happen next. Horror features can actually go from a killer scene to a paranormal scene, or a psychological scene, or an extraterrestrial scene, monster scene, zombie scenes, however you want to call it. It has to have something in it which is actually horror. You can't just say that you have blood in your game and then tag it as horror, because that's not really how it works. You can go into a hospital and find blood, and it's not categorized as horror when you look under hospital videos. The demo of Keiko Totori actually has a few excellent points within the game which keeps you on your seat. Stuff that actually you really do not expect. Even at the start of a game, when those hands come out of the wall, you wonder what the heck's going to happen. Obviously you're going to die if you interact with that thing. Horror is also a matter of surprise, so if you're not actually terrified by it, then it actually defeats the purpose of horror in itself. But it depends on if you are actually scared of paranormal entities, because literally, I think Keiko Totori is largely influenced on paranormal activities. Not the film, but just like in general. But when it comes to bad examples of horror, I'm going to have to unfortunately once again resort to Black Winter, because the developer actually said that this part of the game is horrifying. It's supposed to add horror to the entire story, but unfortunately in this scenario, it doesn't add horror, it adds frustration. You can't see 2 feet in front of your face. You can't actually see your face. Well, it's actually like not being able to see your face. It's worthless in this scenario. Some horror games are deeply influenced and deeply affected by the factors of the horror within it, and others only have a really minor amount of horror, despite actually being called a horror game, but really it's more of an unnerving game more than anything else, and keeps you emotionally on your seat, but not actually scared. Jump scares can have their uses, but not like full screen jump scares, which are actually rather annoying, but like little jump scares like a random glass breaking or anything else which is actually a shattering aspect which you don't expect. The Witch's House being a very good example of that scenario where random things break without you realizing, but it's actually quite effective when you think about it. Quite similar to horror in a ways of making the person feel tragic about the characters within the game are indeed the dark genre. Even though the example I am showing on screen is just a demo, this game, Let in the Line, shows a fantastic example of what dark features can include, such as depression and being ignored by those around you. Very dark. Being bullied is also another point of the dark genre, because it is something that is dark and negative. And as you can see by this scene, it is something that makes you feel on your edge, emotional. Something that makes you want to reach out to this poor cub and hug it to make it feel better. Not something which the bullies would give, actually. To have a game which has good dark features, you've got to have something which is similar along the lines along this game, or something else entirely which you think is good, but still offers that same sort of emotional status. Although this example of a dark game, which most people would probably widely differ away from the genre of dark, is Yume Nikki. And it's not the fact that it is not a dark game, but most people, when we look at it at first hand and not understand the lore behind Yume Nikki, it is really unobvious. Some may say that this poor child is very afraid of going outside of their own rooms, or the fact that they just love playing a computer game so much that they actually prevent to leave their rooms could be another factor. But ultimately on this particular game, what you have to do is you have to actually zip around a lot of these different worlds in order to find little things in the game which you would find abnormal, on your seat, on the edge of your seat, dark. Although even at those times they're not particularly dark, but they're just sort of at most uncomforting. But the size of these maps in this game is more than likely to put off a player from exploring everything. Especially since the consideration that if you even play one of the fan games, Yume Nikki, you're going to click that close button instantly even when you go into one of the first maps of the game, or any of map in that consideration. A good dark game will always provide something which will provide a player an edge of uneasiness, something that will make them emotional at some times, but it's got to be the case where it's not just in one point of the game, but in multiple points of the game, especially when they are placed across multiple time zones within the game in itself, not just bits in the beginning and that's it, or bits in the end and that's it, but stuff which is scattered around across all of the game in itself, something which will make it a good horror game, a good dark game, or even a good horror game in itself, all good and that. If the game is way too difficult to play, then it is most likely that I will not play it at all. It's mostly relating towards puzzles and riddles in this case, but in the different sense that actually it's not to do with those, but the actual gameplay mechanics being too difficult. The difficulty of the game mainly relies on the aspect of how many items there are in order to recover your health, in proportion towards the difficulty of getting through enemies within the game. And the game which I find most difficult to play within RPG horror is, without a shadow of doubt, Nightmare of the Snow. This game is not for the weak of heart, and I would not recommend Night of the Snow if you are brand new to this genre of gaming. It is extremely difficult in multiple aspects of the game, including the one that you see on screen, and 2 or 3 other scenarios in the game which you can find out for yourself. But trying to get through this game successfully is like trying to understand how A-level algebra works, or in general, how algebra works. Especially when you get to the maze where you have to collect that dragon stone tablet, it's just so unnecessarily difficult. It puts off any player, to be honest. The puzzles are quite simple to figure out, but the difficulty of trying to get through different scenarios is just so hard. It's so unbalanced, this game, it really is. I want this game to get away from my face, for goodness sakes. Look at the mechanics of Nightmare of the Snow, and just try and not do something which is this complex to do. Unless, of course, you want your players smashing their foreheads on the counter. Somewhat similar to characters and the story of the game is indeed monotonous features, or literally the same thing that occurs over and over and over and over again within the game. And within RPG horrors, there's no other game which has the same amount of features that could be included over and over again than Paranoiac. In Paranoiac, it goes into a sequence like this: dialogue, explore, locked door, explore, locked door, explore, find key, explore, unlocked door, explore, locked door, explore, find key, explore, unlocked door, explore, night, explore, monster, run away, false hiding place, explore, false hiding place, explore, die, repeat, explore, find place, on every night. I know this is one of Yuri's earliest games, but still, so many locked doors in the game is quite baffling and quite monotonous, very monotonous to say the least. Luckily to say that in my experience there aren't many games which offer a similar sort of puzzle slash finding mechanic that Paranoiac does, but you could come across some which are similar like this in this case in your experience. If you're making a game of your own, then just make sure that puzzles are not like this. Make them so that each one is a bit different in their own ways. Something which makes the player seem like they have to think about how to solve it, rather than just like, okay, I know the process because I've done this a million times already. Reading some of the things that you find on blogs, especially on Tumblr, can be considered a pet's peeve to some people. Some of the examples obviously provided here are Examples that I think are really good in how they lay out their blog in itself. Results may vary depending on how you view them. When developers make games, you've got to consider the fact from an outside perspective in which you don't know even an ounce of how to make a game better. These things take a huge amount of time, more time than you think it lets on. It's when you get to the nitty gritties of blogs like confession blogs when your views upon them may start to waver a little bit, because confession blogs in their own right always contain one or two sketchy anonymous asks in them, or in this case on Tumblr, most of them are. My view on Tumblr Anonymous is always going to be this one simple concept. If you can't say something in front of their faces, then don't say it with a similar shady background in comparison to other shady anonymouses which also have the same background, which is just anonymous and cowardice in my mind. Some anons can be nice in their process of asking things or suggesting things, but for the most part that I've seen, anonymous is always used as a weapon of mass irritation and mass annoyance in their own right, just to prove that you think you're immortal behind your own keyboards just simply because you can click anonymous and just spat out whatever you want. Or if you look in deeper into the settings of your account, you can actually click anonymous settings off so that everyone who wants to ask something would have to do it with their profile shown, which is something which I would do. But then again, some people are so sensitive to the point where they're always going to consider the other people's feelings as absolute. But I'd say for the most part, when you're scrolling through different blogs of game developments in the RPG Maker section of the community, then I would say everything's quite tame most of the time. Most of the time. There are times when the community just erupts and anything goes as it goes with some people. I'm putting in translations and releases into the same category just simply because some releases are reliant upon translations being complete, and this is no different. And I'm going to use the recent annoyance of people asking anonymous asks in relation towards Aria's story. In no particular order, or let's just say chronological order, this first one is a little tame, it's not outlining anything aggressive, although if it's any more specific than this, then it could be outlined as passive aggressive, particularly towards the people who are translating the game in itself. A little forced and to the point, but still nothing aggressive, any animosity coming from this anonymous. They're just curious about when the translation will be completed, but still, these things take time and you need to be patient when it comes to this sort of stuff. Remember, not everyone is free just to work on translations. When you say you don't want the translators to feel pressured but you put this anonymous ask up, are you sure about what you're saying is actually true, Anon? Because from my perspective, unfortunately for me, I see this as just, a little bit of a kick towards the translators and the Aria story team. But still nothing too aggressive or anything that is considered aggressive at all. Then obviously for this last example, it has to be something which is actually in evidence a aggressive kind of anonymous ask towards its translation. I mean, what the heck, Anonymous? You don't even really understand what the situation is when it comes to translating games. I don't know about translating games myself, but I'm pretty sure translating something takes a considerable amount of time. Even the smallest bit of dialogue needs to be thought over so that it makes sense in both languages. All in all, I don't think aggressive Anonymous have many regrets posting something without realising the damage that they can do, both in the short term and the long term. Apologies to the Aria story developers if you're actually watching this, but I think you can actually agree that this is a good example to take as an example, a real life example of people who just do not know what they can do when they post something without realising the damage that they inflict upon both you and others around us, especially the kind people like myself and the translators who are working their butts off to make this dream a reality. For some people, you don't actually deserve Aria story because simply you're too impatient to wait for the English translation. There was a time before I joined this community in which the community in itself went absolutely mad on a particular game. simply because people made up their own theories, which, in the game's perspective, anything that you see in the game doesn't exist. This kind of happens all the time within the community, but nothing has been more erupting as the commotion that happened during the time when Eve was launched. All it was back in those days was the strife of the factor that people believed that this tall, 8-foot, skinny guy had an emotional relationship, or anything of that matter, with somebody who is completely in the contrary of opposition, a small girl. So in that case, people will start to wonder what the heck is going on here, and like myself, who is quite new to this community, what the heck is happening during those times? We're going to have to answer some people who have been in this community long enough to know what's kind of happening. I myself personally believe that the strife between Eve and Gary in those days is just completely nonsense. It's just not necessary to be there. Take something for what it is within the game instead of making your own stupid hypotheticals all the time, community. I'm using hypotheticals frequently in this case because hypotheticals are literally a term in which is something that could happen, but in the main circumstances of things doesn't happen. And unfortunately with some people out there, they just literally don't understand the difference between fiction and reality, or they're trying to put fiction within reality, but actually they don't understand why it's not in reality in the first instance. It's sad to see when a community breaks down sometimes because of one stupid little thing that should be buried years ago, but unfortunately, some people like to dig up the past like if it just recently happened. Too shame. We can think of that about other certain things in the world, but I think I'll leave that to your imaginations to try and dig up, or should I say, keep it buried. I say that whatever is written within the game and what happens within the game is what should be said as true. Any theories out there or anything which has no relation within the game whatsoever should just be kept in people's head and not spoken about on the internet, because other like-minded people will just hypothesize in itself as something which is true, which in actual reality is not, because you're just making it up inside your own dome. A number of names of examples of different endings could be bad endings, happy endings, normal endings, good endings, true endings, however you want to call it. Mainly the true ending is not plural in this case. I think within every single game there always has to be a true ending, something which is actually canon within the timeline of the game. And then there are also, of course, the other endings which you can acquire within the game, which adds a bit more story to it, but actually it didn't really happen, but you can see things within a different angle, which I really like. But unfortunately, like hypotheticals, some people take it just a wee bit too far when it comes to the understanding of endings, and also in the fact of a refusal to accept that this is the true ending, this is the canon ending. And then there are endings which are not canon, which people want to be canon. And my advice to that is, if you want a particular ending to be canon, well, just let it be canon inside you. No one's going to stop you from believing which ending is canon towards you, just as long as you're happy with what ending you acquire and which ending you think is canon. It really doesn't matter which one it is. It's you. You can make that decision up for yourself. But the developer, I believe, always has the last word in what ending is the canon ending because of the way the story was written. But subjectively now, I believe that if the game has multiple endings, the endings themselves gotta have some sort of truth to its form. You can't have two different endings which are 100% identical, because in that way it just makes it to believe that, well, what's the point of having two endings when this ending is just like this ending, but you just name it differently, you just title it differently, but in the ultimate reality, they're just both exactly the same thing. Each ending needs to be different in some way. But different results, different characters survive, all characters survive, none of the characters survive, all the characters mutated, all the characters have somehow grown something on them. It doesn't matter how you interpret the ending, as long as you think it's okay and it fits towards the story, but also to the fact that it actually makes sense with the story, and in some ways it is real in its own sense. Now, before you type away in the comments, I'm not like, hey, you there, fan. You are a problem. You are a pet peeve when in these games. I'm not trying to think of it like that, as in you are the actual problem. What I'm trying to say within this scenario is that your views upon the game can actually alter the decision of how good a game actually is. Because in your perspective, it could be bad, while in another person's case, it could be something which is completely contrary. Regardless which factor you look at, whether it's the art style, or how the game runs, how the game plays, how the game performs, how the game sounds, how the game interacts with everything around it, there's always going to be some sort of subconscious feeling that you're going to feel about the game that you are playing. Is this game the same as other games which I've played? Is this game similar towards other games that I've played? Is this game entirely different from another game which I played? Is this game good? Is this game bad? Is this game terrible? Is this game copying another game? Is this game this? Is this game that? Is this game got this? Is this game got that? Anything and everything goes when it comes to being a fan, or just being a player, or in a business term, what is a stakeholder of a game? Well, basically anyone who has an interest within that particular game in itself. So when it comes to looking at a game, you could be the worst person ever for you. You could be just the absolute most barbaric thing that could ever happen when it comes to a community's perspective, a personal perspective, a perspective which is of those around you, like in a physical close proximity. Who knows? Who knows what's around you? Who knows what's speaking to you inside your head at this point in time? As long as you feel you are satisfied with your opinion of a game, it really doesn't matter what you feel. But the difference is if you don't find a particular game to be as invigorating as you feel, it's the difference between putting your feelings out professionally and in a ways helpful for developers, and then, like one of the examples I showed earlier, blowing your own trumpets and just saying something randomly and hurtfully without considering what you're actually saying, a ripple effect as it were, then the differences within other people's opinions upon yours is going to change massively. Obviously in other timelines the results may vary. What I mean by timelines is you say one thing but another timeline they say the opposite thing. And lastly for this video, say you're sitting there in your comfy armchair, you've just painted away at something for a few hours on end, you look at the final result or halfway production, or you've been composing a piece of music for the game for a particular situation, or you voice acted for the game, you look over the files and then you think to yourself, could this be better? Could this be better in any way, shape or form? Could I have made this a different size in which now I regret because it doesn't fit correctly? Actually, as a developer, you could be the worst person to view your own work for yourself, because let's be honest, if you review your own work, it's always going to be much worse off than, let's say, another person reviewing it and they think it is absolutely amazing, whereas with you sometimes you think the work could be far, far better than what it's supposed to be. Or you have something in your mind that is imaginary but it's not actually there on paper because, well, let's just face it, maybe you need a bit more practice within your expertise field of topic to be able to get to a point where you feel satisfied with your own work. If you share your work online, people can actually write some really nice things about it. Those nice things could be from a nice comment to something which is actually critique about the work in itself. And this goes across all departments when it comes to making a game like this. Not just the visual aesthetics or the sound aesthetics or the story aesthetics, but absolutely anything when it comes to a game. You're going to always have that sort of feeling in your head that it just is not going to work out, but when others view it, they think that it's absolutely amazing. Maybe as a content creator you always view that your work is not as good as it should be because, let's be honest, you see all of the different processes that has been went into creating that piece of work. You know what's been in it, you know what's been out of it, you know what stayed in the piece of work, you know what's been completely trashed away, and it end up as a result of something which you could either be really disappointed by, be really proud of it, or somewhere within the middle of these two scenarios. Although I would say that from an external perspective of making games, I think any result is really fantastic. Results may vary on that factor, but I think most of the time when you look at a blog on Tumblr or an RPG Maker, .net, or any other site similar, you're always going to be in awe of any updates that people put out, just simply because it's something fresh, new and exciting from an external perspective of making that particular game. So when I say that the developer is the worst judge of their own work, believe me, in some ways it is actually true. It could be amazing for somebody else, but for you it could be the worst piece of product that you could have ever produced on the table, and you wish that you did not put that piece of work on the table, or even have the imaginative thought of even putting it into the software that you put it in the first place. Regardless of what kind of product it is, you feel absolutely regrettable of making it in the first place. I bet some of you who are watching this actually have this feeling. Please don't, because I am proud of you. And that wraps up this video, folks. I hope you've all enjoyed this. It's been very different from my usual videos. Usually it's very slow paced, we go through the game, but this time it's just been fast paced with a few moments where I just stop talking just to get a little bit of a breather, and of course for you guys some breaks when it comes to the audio of the video in itself. So hope you enjoyed this video, folks. If you have any comments or suggestions on what you like me to do in the future, then please put it down. If you agree or disagree with some of the things which I've said, then please also put it down. And most importantly though, most importantly, if you have not subscribed yet already, then please do so by clicking that lovely subscribe button where you are, but also as well click the bell icon so that you'll be able to get updates in the future, or notifications in your emails, or notifications on your YouTube that we as lovely content creators have just put something up new for you to enjoy. So have a wonderful day, folks, and take care of yourselves.